Bruins Beat is brought to you by Prizepicks.
And welcome into the Bruins Beat, presented by Prizepicks. Use that promo code CLNS to get $50 back when you play your first $5. And we're presented by CLNS Media. Make sure to subscribe to Bruins Rinkside on YouTube for all the great content throughout the offseason. Bruins Beat, Poke the Bear, Pucks with Haggs. Make sure to go subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you don't like looking at us and you just want to listen, make sure to go subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget that CLNS has a plethora of other great content. Patriots Press Pass, Celtics All Access. Go subscribe to those on YouTube. I am Evan Marinofsky today with Anthony Kwetkowski, or as you probably know him, as Bruins Network. Anthony, what is up?
Nothing. I just, I was starting there when you were introducing us and saying, if you don't want to look at us, I think that's someone else's problem. But if you are watching and you're listening, I just want to say thanks for Evan for having me, and happy to be here and happy to talk Bruins. A lot of things going on these days, so we'll try and see how much of them we can cover in one swoop.
Dive in. It's funny right now, right? Like there's so much stuff. I mean, the draft was more relevant than it's ever been with the Bruins
For
since
sure.
I've been covering them. I mean, I can't remember like when I was little. I mean, obviously like the 2010 draft was huge with Sagan, and like you got Dougie Hamilton in 2011, obviously 2015 with the 3 picks, but those also were in the teens. Those were not like, I mean, you had 3 straight picks, but they weren't high, like, huge big top prospect type picks. So the draft's been really relevant. Then free agency, it felt like it was a huge mood swing from the draft was like, holy crap, they killed it. And then free agency, the mood was, oh my God, what are they doing? And then you have dev camp, which was sort of like brought everybody back to like level where it's like, oh, these prospects are actually pretty good. Maybe the future's bright, but the present isn't. How do you feel about things right now? I know that's generic and vague, but like, where are you at with the Bruins organizationally right now?
I think I'm in a better place now than I was at the start of the season. I mean, you talk about roster turnover and you talk about, rebuilding your organization up to the draft. And I mean, listen, the season went pretty poorly, and that was probably destined to be the case at some point. I mean, since 2019, probably we've been hearing about a fall off for the Bruins. 2019 didn't come, 2020 didn't happen. 2023 definitely didn't happen. And then, this last season, it finally looked like the wheels were starting to fall off a little bit. You come into the season with two big swing and misses for free agents so far with, Elias Lindholm and Nikita Dazorov, who the Bruins organization looked at as, guys that they needed to bring in to, keep the ball rolling. And it didn't turn out that way. So I think right now, after a pretty disasterful season with injuries to, McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm and even Marchand down the stretch, to come out of that with one of the consensus top five, top four, even top three prospects, depending on where you listen. I mean, I'm feeling pretty good about that personally. I think for me, there's actually a direction that's established now, which is retooling instead of spinning the wheels in place while you're stuck in the mud or stuck in the snow trying to get out and move forward. And now you actually did what you were talking about. I think in terms of picking a direction and sticking with it, I'm glad that the organization's in a position now where they're actually executing on that. So for example, it probably wasn't an easy call to trade, Brad Marchand, and then let alone some of your non-pending restricted free agents and free agents who are, not in position to walk, like Charlie Coyle and Brendan Carlo. So I mean, making those decisions to say, hey, these guys aren't going to really help us get to where we need to be, and they're not going to help us right now to accomplish that. Let's see what we can get for them and kind of maximize the return. And I think pending some interesting acquisitions in free agency, like you were touching upon, I like the direction, and I kind of like where they're sitting right now. I think they're better off for it than they were this time last year.
Yeah, the direction part I think is the biggest point you made, and I think it's the best thing the Bruins have going for them, where it's like you think about 5 months ago, or maybe six, you can go back to January, February, you're like, oh my God, that prospect pool is limited. Oh, this guy could maybe, if you gave him 20 games, maybe fit in your top nine, maybe your third line right winger or your fourth line center. And, I give them every prop for the deadline. Like that was
For
a
sure.
home run. And I was, Connor and I talked about it on here a lot. You and I, talked about it, messaging each other. Like it was that fear of, well, they're just going to trade Frederick and Brazeau and call it a day and just say, you
Yep.
know what, we'll run it back next year. Guys are under control. They're Bruins, like they're culture guys, Carlo, Coyle, and just roll with it and be okay with that and whatever. And I give Sweeney credit for actually pulling the trigger. And you see, like Coyle just got traded to Columbus, and you already see some Maple Leafs fans unhappy with Brandon Carlo, who I always liked. I always liked
Same.
Carlo here. I thought he was underrated. But again, to get a first and Fraser Minton, who, is one of your top three prospects right now, and then, to trade Coyle and get not only a second, but Will Zellers, who's now one of your top three prospects,
Right.
and that's even with the guys they drafted. I mean, Haggs is clearly number one, and we'll get
Right.
into prospects in a bit, but like, obviously, I don't think anyone's expecting big things this season, but it's like, all right, endure this coming year, see what happens. And then next year, 26, 27 is the big year where it's Hagen's likely comes in. And maybe, what are your younger guys doing? What's Zeller's doing after a year at North Dakota? Cooper Simpson, what's he doing? He's an intriguing prospect. Will Moore, what's he going to be like in year two? What's Dean Letourneau doing? And look, Bruins fans are smart. They follow these prospects too. You certainly do. You're always tweeting about them, which keeps us all informed, which is great. But like that, you're
Try
right. Like
try my best.
the direction they're going in, for that is good. And I'm curious, like your take on this coming season and where they're at. You have the free agent moves with Jeannot, Acimont, Corrali. You have, Blumel. You have Steves, two AHL guys on one-way deals who produced a ton in the AHL. Never really got a lot of NHL experience where they were. Bruins, I think they signed here hoping that they would get that. What do you, free agency-wise, this coming season, what's your take on them? I mean, do you see them as playoff contenders? Do you see them as a lottery team? What's your take?
I mean, first of all, you have to start at the core of the roster, right? You have to look at McAvoy, you have to look at Hampus Lindholm, you have to look at Zaka and Pasternak and Swayman, and you have to look around and say, well, are these guys going to be healthy, first of all? Because I think a lot of their actual seasonal success will depend on their health. I mean, we saw it this year with a roster that had Brad Marchand on it when Hampus Lindholm was down. It was tolerable at first, for a while, but then those minutes started eating at the younger guys. They started kind of forcing the Andrew Peaks and Mason Loris to play further up in the lineup. And then, it was tough for McAvoy to start eating more of those minutes, and it kind of wore him down too. And then unfortunately, he got injured. Hampus Lindholm's still out, and now you have Mason Lohrei playing top pair minutes for, I don't know, 8 weeks in a row or something like that, or
Yeah.
somewhere in that threshold of tough top 4 minutes. So again, if everyone's healthy, coupled with the right moves, and in terms of the right moves, I mean an actual integration of young players and prospects that are in your system who, if you look around the system, you're looking at someone like Matt Plotcher to take a step forward, right? You're looking at
Mhm.
the Bruins putting him in a position to succeed, and you're looking at maybe someone like Fabian Lysell, who's been in that position for probably like a year and a half now, of someone who needs actual reps. And thankfully, towards the end of the season, we saw him get some, and we saw some promising, kind of features to his game that were translating to the NHL. And I mean, speed being one of them. That's typically what you see from the top contenders right now, right? They're fast and aggressive. So for the Bruins, a lot of that hinges, like I said, on the fact that their main core guys that they have now, that they just turn the keys over, in a sense, remain healthy. Got to hope that Swayman has a bounce back season, which there's really no reason to think why he wouldn't. I mean, last year's just an albatross of a year for him, and everything that went wrong could have. Judging from just an outsider looking in, of a kind of messy situation with his contract and, back and forth with the media between him and then Sweeney and Neely and then his agent. So
It was a
again, that
fun
would
little
probably
soap
take
opera
a
though for that one
yeah,
week.
and
It
no,
was
it
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 was
it
good.
was, and for an organization that pretty much never has that kind of flair to it, it was something new for all of us to see. So I
Yeah, it's
mean,
a little seasoning on it on a what
yeah,
typically is a very boring or normal training camp.
right. Just hey, here's
Something
your
fun.
contract, sign it, company
Yeah,
guys, company line type deal.
that's right.
And I think, that definitely took a toll out of Swayman. I mean, you could see it. He even just from a technical standpoint, he wasn't square at shots. He was kind of delayed going post to post. You know, you saw a lot of early goals go in that typically wasn't really the case with him when he was kind of looking like a standout, especially, you know, when you think about trading Allmark and giving him the keys as well, against Toronto in that series, uh, a year and a half ago. Like, he looked great. He looked like a true starter. So to go from that to someone who's barely kind of hanging on in the Corpusalo territory, yeah, I don't buy that he's not gonna, regress positively. At least to a middle of the pack starter type, which they do need him to be better, but also the defense was a mess. Forwards were all out of whack. Special teams also a mess. So again, you gotta hope that Swayman has a rebound. You gotta hope that McAvoy, Pasternak, Geeky, Zaka, Middlestat now, if he's still around come season, which, you know, who knows really, but those guys, you have to hope that they're healthy and they can kind of carry the load that, the front office and the younger players need them to. And in terms of free agency, it's interesting because there were a lot of directions they could have went, and they could have went and they could have signed, Brock Besser to a 7-year deal and tried to kind of pigeonhole their top six into a better point of contention. I'm happy they didn't, and then you look
I'm
around at
with
the
you on
league
that.
and right, and you look at someone like Andrew Mangiapane, and maybe he's someone that could have helped you out too, kind of gave you that scoring touch, that kind of scoring touch that you've needed from some younger guys who haven't taken the step yet. But then, in the same sense, you're committing more years and dollars to these guys who are big ifs, right? So now I would have preferred they didn't do that with anyone. Full disclosure, I would not have turned around and signed Tanner Jeannot to a 5-year deal worth $3.5 million a year for the next five
Yeah,
years.
I'm
I
with
just
you on
wouldn't have done
that.
that.
I didn't have much time for that. I still don't have a lot of time for that.
Yeah, no, but and in terms of the rest of the free agents, though, I like that they got Blumel. I like that they got Steves. I think something there that really stands out to me is both of those guys play kind of fast-paced, aggressive hockey. They're more of that dog on a puck mentality. And to their credit, they haven't, like you said, had many opportunities beforehand. I think Blumel got 14 games, split 7 games between 2 seasons, and over a point per game. He's the top echelon of AHL scorers, and he's still young enough to kind of step in and maybe contribute to a team that can give him that opportunity that Dallas couldn't, because we see it firsthand in Boston over the last 3 seasons with contending teams. They stick with their guys, right? They stick with what they know. They stick with their veterans, and the younger guys kind of get overlooked. I mean, we've seen it with in Boston alone, Georgi Merkulov, right?
Yeah.
And if you're looking at kind of like the devil's advocate part of signing a Blumel or a Steves to a contract is, well, you already have one of the leading scorers in the AHL that you signed, developed, and haven't given an opportunity to. So now you're bringing in two other guys who haven't gotten the opportunity to give them an opportunity before your guys or in tandem with your guys. So that vision kind of seems a little more blurry, I think, in terms of like what free agency was pretty good aside from, the one kind of bad contract that they brought in. And then,
Mhm.
you know, segueing further into free agency, the Jeannot contract, you can look at that one of two ways, right? You can look at it like, oh, you know what? It's just the Bruins being the Bruins. They love their culture guys. They love their old big bad Bruins mentality that they've been chasing seemingly since 2011. Um, but in defense of them in that, which again, this is not an excuse for signing the guy for that term and that AAV, but they don't have a Tanner Jeannot in their organization, like at all. The closest thing they have is a Nikita Zadorov, who you want to focus more on the hockey side of things, right? You want him to focus more on being that kind of second pair left shot defenseman, kind of stay at home physical guy who is intimidating, but intimidating because if you come near the crease, he's going to kill you and take a penalty for it.
Yeah.
So you want him to kind of tune the extracurricular stuff out. And that's an opportunity for Jeannot. And they were chasing that with Trent Frederick for a while too, right? I mean, he was tuning guys up in the AHL, call him up. He was doing it in his first game ever. And then over time, he kind of stopped being that type of presence, right? You kind of saw him not really do much out there. And again, he kind of got a similar value in Edmonton. So this just feels like they wanted to actually find that type of player that they've been coveting, and they went out and got him. Now, Elliot Friedman says out there, hey, Tanner Jeannot had 10 suitors lined up for him. Obviously, the Bruins won the bid. I think that's when you just kind of let go to auction, though, right? Like, you don't need to do that.
Yeah, 5 years. I don't get that. Like again, if it was a 1 or 2 year deal, it's like, all right, like, okay, fine,
Even
take a
3
flyer on him.
years,
Yeah,
3
like
years is like whatever. That's some of these guys are going to be 3 years older. I mean, everyone's going to be 3 years older. Time doesn't stop. But then you're looking at Lindholm and Zaka and Pasternak, and it won't matter as much. So
yeah.
yeah,
And the other thing I keep thinking with this free agency class is, if you did a couple of those moves with if you did 1 or 2 of those moves with the bottom 6, if you did Jeannot for a year or 2, or if you did Corrali and Acimont, like I get that. We can all agree they were missing veteran presences last year, and they were really easy to play against last year. I mean, they just
so
were.
easy.
That's why they would. That's
Yeah,
why they would get blown out. That's
yeah.
why they were inconsistent. Like, and that goes in hand with the veterans part. And I get it. Like, there, we talk about young players. There aren't a lot of spots in this lineup, if any, that you're like, oh, you can pencil Patra in there or Minton in there. Because the reality is, like, you can say, oh, Fraser Minton should be your third line center opening night, but you have a bunch of third line center options that are older
Yeah.
and more experienced, and fourth line center is the same thing. And so from that perspective, I disagreed with free agency, but I understand the need to try to get tougher. And I talked about this with Connor on Poke the Bear that we did a couple hours ago before recording this. Like, Marco Sturm did an interview with him, and Sturm sort of laid it out of like, we're too easy to play against, and we need to have a little bit of that back. And I don't fully disagree with them, especially because
No, I agree.
they're a bridge team. This is not like they're not going for the cup this year, or at least they're not building I don't think they have the roster to be able to do that. An interesting thing you mentioned was Steves and Blumel. And you mentioned how sort of the Bruins have their own guy like that in Merkulov. And I sort of agree with that, because Merkulov hasn't gotten a huge look up at the NHL level, and he's
Yeah.
produced a ton in Providence. But I think it sort of hits it like sometimes that happens. Sometimes guys just need a fresh change of scenery. And I think it's true
Yep.
with Steves. It's true with Blumel. And it's honestly probably true with Merk, where it's like
Absolutely.
you have a guy internally. It just hasn't really worked out. He hasn't taken that step internally. Maybe he will somewhere else. And obviously they haven't traded him or anything like that. But I think I was fine with them taking flyers on Steves and Blumel. And I don't know their games well. I literally just know the stats. You know them better than I do. But like, I am curious if you think those guys can make the lineup next year, or at least make compelling
Yeah.
cases to make the lineup next year.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point about Merkulov potentially being one of those guys that might work out better elsewhere. And I think part of the reason for that is he's not a guy that really pushes the pace when he plays, right? I mean, you talk
Mhm.
about Blumel and Steves specifically not knowing their game well, but they skate hard, they skate fast. They can play that north-south style. Blumel specifically, he can get it inside, he can get low, and he can hang on the perimeter too and make plays if space isn't available. But Merkulov's kind of, he's more of a shifty guy. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He's not the strongest, power skating type. So if you're him, you have to be undeniably skilled. And I think he is. Like, I think his puck skills are top notch. I think his shot is obviously, top 6 quality in the NHL. It's just whether or not his feet and the rest of his game can actually keep up with his hands and his shot. So in that aspect, I would definitely agree there. And I think Steve strikes me as a guy, kind of in the mold of like a Robert Lantoji from a few years ago. If
Mm.
anyone out there is listening and remembers such a dubious name, um,
That's a
a
name I
guy
haven't thought
who
of in a long time.
right, and it's not so much that they came from the same place or the same success. It's just in terms of play style, they got that kind of off the rush shooting capability. They play kind of fast paced, and but again, like you look at the organization he was in, and they've been kind of coveting those guys too, and Toronto never looked at him in that capacity. So maybe it's a situation like Merkulov where other guys out there are like, what's going on there? Like, why can't the Bruins get the creative center in the lineup that they've desperately needed? Well, if they don't fit your system, they don't fit your system, right? And I mean, at some point, you gotta score when you're up here. And Merkulov had 4 games in bottom 6 matchups under Monty, and then last season he got 6 games and he had an assist, and that was it. But again, when everything's going wrong, and then you have to ask the younger guys to be undeniable to stay in the lineup when your veterans aren't doing the same, kind of
Mhm.
seems like an imbalance to me and almost like an injustice of sense. So I do think both of those guys actually have a shot at making the team in some capacity. But on the flip side, like you were saying with their free agency class, Easymont, absolutely great pickup they got there for the fourth line. Like I think if you look at the lineup, they were missing a guy like that, a guy who will shoot the puck from the parking lot essentially, and
That's a good way to put it.
forechecks his ass off. He's an absolute pest to play against, but a deliberate pest to play against. Not a Trent Frederick of the last 2 seasons getting in your face after the whistle kind of pest, but no, he's getting inside your gear. Like he's putting elbows in uncomfortable spots in the forecheck, and he's trying to disrupt you from the play physically and win the puck. So I think they needed a guy like that for a fourth line that also seemed uncharacteristically kind of soft and easy to play against, which again, not something that the Bruins typically deal with. I mean, even Cole Koepke last year, like I thought he had a really good run to start the season, and then by the end of the season, he's just kind of like a north-south, either shoot, dump, or change type guy. So they needed someone that has more of this kind of bite to their game, but also has pretty solid, underlying possession metrics because you need that side of it too. And you can't keep fooling yourself into thinking that, these old, big, lumbering forwards are going to be an answer for you just because they can hit someone. And, you know, I know we touched on the Jeannot contract, and like I said, it's not an excuse necessarily, but they don't have a Jeannot, right? When you look at who else they signed, Sean Corrali to a 2-year, almost $2 million deal, like why? You know, you already have Sean Corrali's in your system right now. You've
100%.
been drafting and developing bottom 6 guys because of where you've been drafting in terms of order, end of the first round, second round, sometimes later. So what is the point of signing a Sean Corrali if you already have a John Beecher who can do the same thing, right? What is the point of that if you have a Mark Kastelic, if you have a newly acquired Merritt who's Nadinov, right? Like, where are they going to now fit into the equation if you have to pencil in Tanner Jeannot for, a third line left wing spot? And who knows, maybe he's not penciled in for that, but he's definitely in the lineup. You're not paying a guy five years
He's in the
at
lineup, yes.
3.5 million to sit on the bench, right? Now maybe I'm being too much of a pessimist here in terms of Corrali because he is a replaceable player. Like even last year, like a replacement level center. That's what he was by the metrics, that what he was by his matchups, by being completely buried underwater for sure.
Yeah.
But that's someone that you can send down to Providence, and someone you should send down to Providence to give 24-year-old John Beecher a better opportunity to kind of capitalize on his game. He had a down year. Obviously, a lot of players did. And now you go into the season with another guy on the roster who's making NHL money, So to me, that feels like they're penciling this guy into the lineup opening night one way or another. Maybe that doesn't last, maybe you can't really sustain that, especially with maybe Marco Sturm, who doesn't have any kind of attachments to any of these guys except for Jeannot. But yeah, I mean, I I just don't know where everyone fits, right? You got, like you said, Matt Poitras. I think you can pencil him into a lineup spot. I mean, I think he's made the team 2 years in a row now out of camp. I don't see that changing, judging by the fact that he was, um, you know, point per game last year in Providence, his first year playing in the AHL really. So I think he's going to be a center spot, but I think his spot might have to be third line center, which is probably something where Fraser Minton should play. Or Fraser Minton should be at fourth line center because you can insulate him with a Beecher and a Kastelic or a Janot and a Kastelic next to him. That way you have a guy who's younger but more responsible on the right in Kastelic, who has a great face-off percentage and good defensive numbers. You can insulate him. But now you got Crowley in the mix. You got Blumel, you got Steves, you got Kuznetsov, who needs waivers, and you still have Fabian Lysell. So, like, again, it would bum me out to see this team sign these kind of veteran stopgap players and shoot themselves in their foot by not giving their younger guys an opportunity.
Especially in a season like this, where it's
For
not
sure.
you're not in cup contention. Like, this is fully a bridge. See what you get in these younger guys. One thing I keep going back to, all these lineup projections have the same first line, which I agree. Geeky, Lindholm, and Pastrnak. That makes sense. But then I see
and they
Zacha
were
middle.
and not to interrupt, but I mean they were great down the stretch last year, right? But it was also at a point where it didn't really matter. So
Completely.
who really knows?
Completely. Yeah,
But
no,
I
and that's
for sure agree.
that's my thing is, like, I get that, and then I see like Zacha, Middlestat, and Arvidsson as the popular second line. Would it shock you though to see that top six different? No, it wouldn't at all. Like, I could absolutely see, I don't know who it is, but someone moving up into that. Does a Matt Poitras find his way up there?
I think chances are he might.
He might,
At least
like,
in training camp. I mean, especially if you look at Middlestat, like, and Middlestat gets a lot of kind of a lot of friction from the fan base and the media base, and I get it. I mean, he's not the best player. He's been characterized as soft, weak, and kind of easy to play against, and that's kind of been the knock on him for a long time, right? But one thing that Middlestat does do, and I thought that showed well in flashes for the Bruins, is he has this knack for offensive plays with like this creative flair that not many other players on the team have. Um, and yeah, his defensive side, like, he's high risk, high reward every time he passes the puck in the offensive zone. It might be one of the best passes you've seen, or it might just get intercepted and you might be like, what was he looking at? So I think his ability to actually kind of sling the puck around the zone in that kind of like off hip style, which is very low effort, creativity, it's a welcomed addition. So I mean, maybe on the wing that's better served, but he doesn't fit the kind of prototypical Bruins mold of a center. He's not like a two-way stalwart. He's not a guy who really, you know, strikes fear into people as a two-way presence. So I don't know. And I mean, you mentioned Victor Arvidsson, and I don't think we touched on that because it wasn't a free agent signing, but I much prefer them doing that route, going the route of trying to acquire someone that needs to be moved because the other team that's getting rid of him needs the money that badly that you can kind of get in there cheap. Does he do a lot? That's yet to be determined. He's a volume shooter, though. And I joked with Connor actually on Twitter the day that he was acquired. I said, that's Swedish Craig Smith.
Yeah,
And
I remember
that's
that.
kind of what you're looking for. Like, there were just too many times where this team and this roster in the top six specifically were passive. They were just looking for seams that didn't exist. They were waiting for lanes that never opened, and they just weren't shooting. And if they were shooting, it was from the perimeter and not generating traffic or shots really because of it. They were just slinging the puck. So I think if you get a volume shooter there, at the top part of your lineup, and then you add a Easymont into the bottom part of it, I think that puts you in a better direction. But yeah, I mean, like you said, the top six, a lot of question marks aside from Geeky and Pastrnak. But even then, we know that Geeky plays center. We know he plays right wing. We know he plays left wing now. Maybe he gets a look at center. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's why I keep going back to, and I don't know who jumps in. Like, Patra's the first name that comes to mind of someone who could jump into your top, who's a top six player. At least that's sort of his ceiling. And then Blumel and Steves are interesting. I don't know if you're gonna insert them in your top six that early in the season. Maybe they work their way in, if at all. But like, and then you sort of get into, there's Fabian Lysell as well. Like, what does he look like in camp? What is he like during the preseason? So like, that's why I'm not set in stone with that as my top six. And I don't think that it should be like a foregone conclusion that is your full top six. I think that top line probably stays together just given their success at the end of last season. And it feels like your most stable point. and I don't even think it's that stable, but like you don't have a lot. You don't have a lot of offense. So if that's going to be your most stable point, then that's probably your first line. But that second line is where I'm like, could like Patra fit in the middle there? You know, do you move Middlestat to the wing with, you know, and have Patra in the middle of Zaka and Middlestat? Or do you try Patra on the wing? Like Fraser, you have Fraser Minton now too. Like they keep saying Minton's a third line center, and maybe he is. But you know, you have so many middle six centers: Lindholm, Zaka,
Right.
Middlestat, Minton, Patra. They can't all play center. Do you try Patra on the wing? And that's what I keep going back to of like, do they go there? And I like Patra down the middle. I don't mind him. But if that's how he's going to play and you need his style of play, then you might just have to suck it up and try him at right wing. That might be, you know, what they end up doing. It doesn't mean they're gonna, but they could.
No, well, I mean, we've seen it before. We saw Forsbacker Carlson played on I think the right side of Krejci for a little bit there in Boston.
That's right. That's right. I
Yeah,
forgot about
and he
that.
was, you know, the next two-way center. I mean, we saw it with Trent Frederick. He was a bona fide top six center in college. You know, he was the same thing in Providence, and ultimately he ended up playing on the wing. Again, a guy that never really got too much of a chance to kind of grow as a center because the Bruins had so many down the center that were already better. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it's tough to compete with Charlie Coyle for a Charlie Coyle job. You know, and the same applies for kind of Sean Corrali or Mark Kaslick or John Beecher down in the fourth line right now. It's like it's tough for Fraser Minton, who's 20 right now, turns 21, doesn't need waivers, can go to Providence, only played 11 games there last year. It's tough for him to compete with Sean Corrali for Sean Corrali's job, you know?
Yeah.
So I agree for sure. You know, you look at kind of the fact that last year the Bruins didn't have enough centers. Now they might have too many. It's just kind of something you got to figure out.
And they have more in their prospect pool now. Like you know, Hagen's more and Letourneau goes down a bit. So it's like, oh, center's not as big of a problem in your prospect pool anymore. Now it's
Not since you got
wings and
Haggs.
defensemen and all those things. I want to get into rebuilding. There was a story in Daily Faceoff that I read and I got a little scared. Got a little scared reading it, where I'm like, oh God, this might not mean good things coming in the future. But first, our friends over at Prizepicks, always good things over there. Prizepicks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, Prizepicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long over at Prizepicks. On Prizepicks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports. Combine your favorite basketball players with players from baseball, hockey, esports, and much more. Prizepicks, they invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect, and you can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. App is super easy to use. To create a lineup, all you have to do is pick more or less on a few player stats for your shot to win up to 2,000 times your money. And they have great things like Flex Friday, Taco Tuesday, where you get discounted player props, which is awesome. Make sure to go do that. And so again, if you want to get in on this, sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus because it's guaranteed. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prizepicks, run your game. Sprint your game, run your game. Get over to Prizepicks. They're our friends, and they are great people. So this rebuilding story was in Daily Faceoff, and the title is "Do Rebuilds Actually Work?" And the author, who was it? I want to make sure I give proper credit. It was Paul
Depends
Paduti.
if you're a Red Wings fan.
That's right. The Red Wings is Stevie Y is the main photo of this. Has to hurt some people.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is he made a graph of, you know, rebuild timelines of the salary cap era that's since 2006, and a couple of ground rules. A rebuild starts when a team has at least 2 bottom 10 finishes, including a bottom 8 finish in a 3-year period. And a rebuild ends when a team makes the playoffs in consecutive years or wins the Stanley Cup in its return to the postseason. So essentially, you got to make the playoffs in 2 straight years or more, and you're out of your rebuild. So like, according to this graph, the New Jersey Devils have been in a rebuild since 2011, which like it might not feel like that because they're competitive and they're good, but they've yet to make the playoffs in 2 straight years in a long time. So like
That's
their
actually surprising.
isn't it? Like I didn't realize
I
that,
would
but
not have really guessed that.
no, and that was one of the things where I'm like, they're still technically in a rebuild according to this. And like the Buffaloes, they're actually, according to this graph, they've been in a longer rebuild than the Buffalo Sabres, which again
Nice.
doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like that because they've made the playoffs and they've had good seasons, but they've never been able to really duplicate it the next year. Like I'm looking at the graph right now, like even the year they finished third in 2023 in the whole NHL, they finished 23rd the next year. So again, like they're very wonky. They're all over the place, and they've spent a lot of time at the bottom of the league. And one of the real takeaways from the article is that the average rebuild is 8.5 years. 8.5 years, which is mind-boggling. And that does include sort of the very beginning when you sort of start to fall off. And that includes the end when it includes the year you make the playoffs, and then it ends when it's the second year in a row. So like being truly at the bottom is not 8.5 years, but the rebuild itself is 8.5 years. And what I went to with this story, are the Bruins headed for that? Like, I don't think they are, but I don't know. Like they had to me, I look at it like, and we've talked about it a little bit already. You have your core, Pastrnak, McAvoy, Swayman. You have your supplemental guys, Hampus Lindholm, Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, Morgan Geekie now. And then you have your young guys, you have Mason Lohrei, and then you have your prospects. You have James Hagens and those, and you hope they supplement everything in 1 to 3 years. But like, what if it doesn't all go to plan? Like, do you see any way in which this is an 8.5 year project, which last year would be year one, so 7.5 more years to go? Do you see any way in which that actually hits that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a case for that happening. I mean, look at this year, right? Even with, a kind of a better roster on paper than what they're entering this year with, I mean, everything just kind of fell apart, right? I mean, they went through a coach, they went through an interim coach, they had injuries, they had guys really not showing up. The leadership group completely fell apart. I think this might be them in the start of the rebuild, to be fair. But I think also the teams that are rebuilding for an average of 8+ years, what is it that they're typically looking for, right? They're looking for a star offensive player. They're
Mhm.
looking for a star number one defenseman. They're looking for an actual number one goalie, and they're looking for supplemental pieces. And they're also looking for a number one center. That's the key thing that is non-negotiable for any cup winner in the last God knows how many years. They have a play driving number one pivot down the middle. The Bruins haven't had that since obviously Bergeron and Krejci left. But those teams have been chasing what the Bruins already have, and the Bruins have been chasing that one final piece, which is the number one top line center, night in, night out, real offensive catalyst, right? But like you said, their core is already a 100-point franchise player in David Pastrnak. He's a 60-goal scorer in the NHL. You have Charlie McAvoy, who is a top 5 defenseman in the NHL when he's healthy and on his game.
Yeah,
You have
top 10 at
Swayman,
least.
who's
But yeah.
yeah, and Swayman's at least a top 12 goalie in the league when he's on his case, top 15.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Either way, that's a guy who you have seen win you a playoff series. Like he locked it in when he needed to, and you got better for it, and he got better for it too. Now, again, if all doesn't go according to plan, then yeah, it could be longer. But what if it goes right? What if and again, I'll use this example because it makes sense for the Bruins specifically. The Bruins, when they have been drafting, they've been looking for a guy who can kind of hit in the late rounds and be either an NHL contributor or be a guy that might be able to play above his means. John Beecher, Trent Frederick, Dean Letourneau, Jack Studnicka, kind of the same value there. Granted, Studnicka was in the second round, and none of those guys really panned out to be, hitting that grand slam there. Instead, they were kind of like base hits, some RBIs mixed in. But the type of player that I think personally restricts your rebuild from taking form in actual materialized wins and success is a James Higgins type prospect. And the Bruins, I don't know, man. It seems like they got pretty lucky this year. Like, that's the type of prospect that shouldn't be available to a team like the Bruins, who had two teams pass them in the draft lottery from 10 and 14 up to 1 and 4, which knocked you from 5 to 7 in a weak draft already, where James Higgins was supposed to go third, no later than third, you know? Um, Again, like, that's the type of player that teams are chasing when they're rebuilding. And he still has to develop. The Bruins still have to develop him and integrate him, and a lot of things have to go right for him. But at baseline, they have their number one center prospect that you would expect a lottery team only to get. And the Bruins got it while still having their main core members here, either in their prime or on the back half of their prime. David Pastrnak, 29 right now as of today. This entire season, he's going to be 29 until he turns 30 in, I don't know, end of May, early June. Charlie McAvoy, same thing, late 20s. Pavel Zacha, late 20s. I mean, Jeremy Swayman, mid 20s. You got Mason Lohrei, same thing, not even mid 20s yet. And now you have Matt Poitras coming in to be a supplemental player for your, middle six group. You have a Fraser Minton who might either be a rock star fourth line center that you can sign for many years to come and not have to worry about ever filling that position for as long as he plays, or maybe he's your defensive minded, Lars Eller type third line center. So I think now that you got James Higgins, it drastically changes the kind of projection and outlook of your rebuild into a retool, because you have the player that you shouldn't have gotten. Like, let's just say it honestly. Like, you shouldn't have him. And I know me and you talked about him for months at a time. Like, I know you're obviously in the race all the time, and I'm in as much as I can be. But, the consensus all year was they got no shot at James Higgins unless they finish at the bottom of the barrel. They finished at the bottom of the barrel. They got awful, awful lottery luck. The two things that couldn't happen, two people behind you moved up, did. And you still got him at 7th because other teams, I don't know. I don't know, man. Just seems like a guy that you shouldn't let get to 7th overall, and it seems like a guy that if you're the Bruins, you should be thanking your lucky stars that you actually have a path towards contention again. You don't have to wait, to maybe hold your breath to see if Jack Eichel makes it to free agency, to see if Connor McDavid makes it to free agency. I'm not saying he's going to be on that level, but he's looking like a Logan Cooley type, an actual top line player who can drive your team. And you got him.
Yeah, and this is I completely agree with you on this, because I don't think it's 8.5 years. I don't think this is a full rebuild. I think it's a retool. It's a year or two. Yeah, they might not be great this year, but I agree with you. They might
be, pushing for a wild card spot if everything goes right. Like, again, last year comes, I don't know.
Well, think about last year. Basically everything went wrong. Swayman was his worst self. Elias Lindholm was his worst self. David Pastrnak and Morgie were their best selves. But you go down the list, McAvoy gets hurt. He wasn't great throughout the year either. Hampus Lindholm got hurt. You had all these things. Pavel Zacha didn't have this incredible year. Sort of more below average for him. If those guys revert to the mean, revert to what they can be, they're not the 5th worst team anymore. If Jeremy Swayman is better, if Pavel Zacha is a little bit better, if Elias Lindholm is better, if Casey Middlestad is better, and again, that's a lot hinges on that. They're picking 14th or 15th? You're in the hunt for a wild card spot. Yeah, you're in the hunt for a wild card spot. That's fine. You're not bottom of the barrel. It's not, unwatchable. And again, a lot has to go right. I can't say that enough. That's not a guarantee. But you nailed it with you have a franchise offensive star in David Pastrnak. You have your number one defenseman in Charlie McAvoy. You have your franchise number one goalie in Jeremy Swayman. You were missing one piece. Number one center. It's a big piece, but you got it.
Biggest.
You seem to have got it in this draft, which again, if you got Jake O'Brien, I think would feel fine about the pick, but it'd be maybe he's a number one center, but he's probably more of a number 2. He's a top 6 center. That's fine. But you still probably need, you need something to go your way. your thing, what went your way was the picks. What
Yeah.
went your way was Philly picking Porter Martone, Nashville picking Brady Martin. That's what went your way.
Caleb
And that's
Denwye at 4th overall. I mean,
yeah, like, and that changes. And at least he was more projected there. Like that
yeah, for
was
sure.
all along up there. I know there's questions about him with the Q and things like that, but I just go back to with this group. Like once you start, like Court and I talked about this a week ago. Like once Haggs comes in, and again, you need him to have a good year at BC this year, and you need him to develop with you. I completely agree. But like once Haggs comes in, and Zeller starts to hit and Will Moore comes up. And I like Cooper Simpson a lot. I think Cooper
Same.
Simpson actually could end up being a player. And
Yeah.
again, it's just off dev camp, but everything I've heard from different people around the game, like what I saw, like that's a good player. Not saying he's going to be anything, but like wouldn't shock me if he is. But once those guys start supplementing the core at the NHL level, and you hit on it before, David Pastrnak's 29, Elias Lindholm's 30, Middlestat's 26, Geeky's 26, Zaka's 28. Tanner Jeannot is 28. He's signed long term. McAvoy's 27. Lindholm's 30. Hampus Lindholm's 31. Zadorov's 30. Lowry's 24. Like Swayman's 26. So like they're not old. This isn't the Penguins.
No.
Like when Haggs comes up, Pastrnak's what, 31 years old? Like Elias Lindholm's
He might be.
32.
Pasternak might be maybe 30.
Because if it's the end of next year,
Yeah, Haggs might come up end of next year, which that is right in line with the projection that we've seen from James Haggs all along with other guys who have been in his shoes. So, I mean, that seems pretty plausible.
it absolutely does. And that's why, to me, I think that this is not going to be a full blown rebuild. Now, they could be a lottery team next year again. But to
Yeah.
me, that wouldn't mean that they're rebuilding. It wouldn't.
No.
Now, by definition, by the article's definition, it would be rebuilding.
Right. But
I don't think it's going to be that long. I think even if you're in the lottery next year, you're not in the lottery the year after. Something would have had to have
no.
gone horrifically wrong to be in the
Right.
lottery in 2027. I don't think that's going to be the case.
No. And I mean, according to that list in that article, you would rather be Buffalo than New Jersey. And I just would never in a million years think that way.
Never
So,
trade for that. No thanks.
no, God, no. Yeah,
No.
I largely agree there. I think, like you said, and another big part of that too is, you know, you look at the defense. Most teams that are rebuilding, they don't have a Charlie McAvoy, but they also don't even have a Hampus Lindholm. Like
No, they
he's
don't.
legitimate when healthy, a top pair defenseman, and I mean he proved it 2 years ago with his Norris bid. I mean that was a very good season. This past year, look at the way the defense kind of started crumbling when he went down. I mean, for a little bit it was okay, but like I mentioned earlier, they started getting beat down after a while because you don't have that big Clydesdale minute eating defenseman. But now you also have Mason Lohrei, who's coming into his own as a legitimate prospect player, young, whatever you want to call him, who's looking like he can be your first power play quarterback. I mean, like that's your first unit guy. And who knows if he was given the minutes that McAvoy kept getting out of the gate last year, all year long on the power play, even with the misplays and the defensive lapses, I think he's a 50-point player last year.
He
And
might be.
I don't see any reason why he can't be a 50-point guy this year. You know, he was in the 30 points already, getting largely power play 2 minutes. He started getting power play one kind of down the stretch when McAvoy was out, but then at that point, like you guys already are what you are. No one's scoring, no one's really shooting. So I agree. I don't think it's going to be an 8-year thing, and for all those reasons mentioned, I think there's a beacon of hope now, and it's because the Bruins got fortunate enough to make the right pick at the right time with the right prospect. You have a path towards contention. It's the hardest area to fill, and it's historically only filled from the top 5 picks in the draft, if not higher.
Yeah, I completely agree. And with Lohrei, there are a lot of defensive strides that need to be made. I mean,
Yeah,
I think we can all
for
agree
sure.
on that. But I agree with you in the sense of like offensive defensemen. Absolutely. By the way, I want to give a shout. Make sure to subscribe to Bruins Ringside on YouTube, all the podcasts throughout the offseason. Poke the Bear, Pucks with Haggs, Bruins Beat. And would love for you to turn on notifications if you want to leave a nice review, like, comment, subscribe. It's all you can ask for. It's all free, by the way. So make sure to go do that and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and leave it a nice review there. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I know I'm asking a lot, but it's all free. So it takes a minute. So we appreciate all the love and support for sure. And then obviously CLNS has a lot of other great content. Patriots Press Pass, Celtics All Access. They are very active this time of year. So make sure to go follow them over there. You are big on Twitter and you like to get into it with people. And I'm curious if there's a topic, and maybe we've already covered it, but is there a topic right now that you see people getting wrong that like really grinds your gears, that you see and you're like, you got to be kidding me? Is there anything right now? I know it's vague and generic and maybe you can't think of something off the top, but like, is there a topic or a take you've been seeing that you just can't stand?
You know me, I'm a big prospects guy. I'm a big draft guy. I can't really, well, it's not that I can't understand it, but it's like something that really boils my blood in a sense is the whole, the Bruins are the worst drafters in the world. They're, constantly making the wrong pick. I feel like a lot of that is Monday morning quarterbacking at its finest. And I think if you look at around the league at other GMs and other teams who are picking in similar spots of the Bruins, you're going to find an equally as tragic record. It's just in the macro sense, what happens. The guys that you think are going to make a difference, the guys that a lot of players, I mean, a lot of people think should have been drafted over players like Trent Frederick or like John Beecher, or Dean Letourneau as recent as last year's draft before this one. You have to use context and nuance to kind of understand where those players come from, the guys that are really difference makers, and why they aren't available at where you're picking, which is in the later parts of the first round. I remember this year watching Washington, and a lot of people, were using them as kind of a case study of what the Bruins should have been doing with their success in the draft, because they got people like Alexi Protas and they got Connor McMichael, and it's like, yes, they did that. However, if you look at their 10-year sample of drafting in that range, it's not good. And
Yeah.
even then, like, I don't think the players that you should be, like, oh man, that's the guy that got away is a 50-point guy like McMichael, And the example that I always use, and it applies recently to Dean Letourneau, because everyone now is saying, oh, well, Dean was a horrible pick. He was a bust from the start. How dare you take someone from Canadian prep school, blah, blah, blah. Liam Greentree was right there. Like, he's the guy. He was selected, he was projected to go 18th overall. He fell to you at 25. Why didn't you take him? Okay. First of all, why is he available at 18? Why is he projected to be at 18 and not 10 or 9 or 11? Why is he available at 25 when all the other GMs that you're talking about don't pass on these guys did pass on him, because 25 of 32 GMs did? Why is he available, right? And I go back to the John Beecher draft as a good example of this, because I think my exact terminology when someone asked me, I did a Q&A in 2019 before the draft, I said, Kaliev at 30th overall, Arthur Kaliev would be the dream. Like, that would be a dream scenario, would never happen. It happened. They passed on him for a bottom six center in John Beecher, who was always projected to be that, right?
Yep.
I thought that would have been a mistake. But I also appreciated the direction that they wanted and what they saw in Beecher. And, I have an easy time separating the two because, I don't know, I just doesn't really phase me that much, right? Like, I'm not married to some prospect who's going 30th overall who was available at 25 or vice versa, and they fell. But I felt like that was going to be one that people kept harping on year after year after year, and Kaliev looked good for a while, and now he's on his third team, and it's like he's barely an NHL player right now. I mean, there's still time for him to turn around, but his value to his team when he's on is I don't know, comparable to John Beecher's, which is someone who gets buried in defensive, assignments and buried in the defensive zone and has a good face-off percentage, and you can kind of put him into a role and play him there, right? So now we're looking at the same thing when it comes to drafting with Dean Letourneau, same thing. everyone, their big take was that he's a bust.
Mhm.
You should have drafted Liam Greentree, but then they'll also turn around and say, "Oh, Don Sweeney and the Bruins, they have no succession plan to Patrice Bergeron. They have no way of getting a number one center." Well, they drafted a guy who might be one someday, or they drafted someone who at least has like the offensive upside to be that type of player, right? It's still an incredibly long road. And now it's the same thing. We heard in 2019, "Oh, how dare you draft John Beecher? You should have drafted Kaliev. He was right there." Well, the Kaliev people got it wrong. The Beecher people, myself included, also kind of got it wrong too. I mean, he's a role player, but he is also what he was projected to be, a fourth line, transition skater. And that's kind of what he is right now, barring last year, which was pretty rough for him. But yeah, now we see it again. And now it's Liam Greentree, who, exploded in his D+1 year in the OHL, but he's also a 6'3" physical, mature power forward. So how much of that is him dominating that league because he's so much, physically gifted, more so than his peers? I don't know. Is that when we look back on in 2, 3, 4 years and say, damn, like that was the guy who got away from us and he was right there? It's completely possible. But my point is, I think the Bruins have largely done pretty well with their drafting, given where they have been and kind of what they've had to do to sustain their success, which is win games. You're not going to get the players that you need unless you get very lucky, like other teams have. So the take that really just kind of drives me insane is that the Bruins in a vacuum are just horrible at drafting. They make horrible picks. They don't know what they're doing. I think you can say that about a lot of teams. And it's not even just about the 2015 draft, which has been beaten into oblivion. It's about a lot of them. I mean, the guys that you think are worth, kind of crying over typically aren't available to you in that spot to begin with. So it's all kind of up in the air after the first 20 picks in the draft, the first 15 picks in the draft. Who really knows?
Well, that's the thing, is that after pick 14-ish, that guy picked at 16 could easily be a
Who
mid-second round
knows?
pick. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's one thing that people sometimes, like, in my job now, I didn't fully understand it before, but now in my job, seeing how much kids change from 14 to 18 is
Yeah.
drastic. It is rare
Yep.
for the best kid at 14 to be one of the best at 18 still. It is so rare. It's also very rare for the draft picks at 18 to be really good at 22 and 23. And that's why it's random. That's why if you scroll through any draft, like on Hockey DB, and they have the stats, there will be a random sixth with a ton of points. There will be a random fifth or fourth. There will be a couple fourths with a ton of points, or a seventh. And there will be a ton of guys in the second that do nothing. Or there will
Yep.
be guys in the first that don't really do anything. And like, I think that's one of the things that, and I don't say people don't know it. It's just sometimes it's hard to grasp, is like, they're picking these guys at 18. You saw it, you're seeing it in this draft. Like, most of that top 10 is not going to be in the NHL next year. They're not going to be
No,
with their
God, no.
teams. There's no reason to. And like, a lot can happen between then or now and when they get to their teams, which is 1 to 3 years down the road. So much can happen. And it's same with Letourneau, where it's like, yeah, he could be a bust, but also he could take 4 full years at BC or wherever in college and develop and be a guy and spend a
Yeah.
year in Providence. And it's 4 or 5 years down the road, he's an impact guy. That could easily
Right.
happen.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the Bruins drafting, it's interesting because, like, I'm of the belief that the truth lies in the middle, where
It
like
does. It absolutely does.
they have not had optimal picks for a long time, as you said. Like, you can't expect to be getting star players with the 27th overall pick, or when you trade your firsts and your first pick in a draft is in the 3rd round. Like, I completely get that. But there's the other side where, like, you do need luck to hit. You
You
do
do.
need a random 4th to hit at times, or you need
Yep.
your second to pan out. Like, and they've had Lowry, Patra, both 2nd round picks. So like, they've had that
Yeah.
to an extent, but not enough. Whereas, there have been some teams that have had that luck. And that, like, a 5th round pick hitting
Dallas is
is
one of them.
rare, but it's rare.
Very
Like,
rare.
it's rare. It's not like some genius scout. It's not some mindset of like, man, this guy's great at picking guys in the 5th. Like, if you get a 5th round pick, if you get Kirill Kaprizov, that is complete luck. I don't care what
Yeah.
anyone says. That's luck.
I
Everybody
think
else
it's
passed on him.
yeah,
Like, it's
it's
luck.
luck that he pans out, but also like again, that story was a scout's plane was delayed or a hotel assignment was messed up, so he happened to be at a local rink and saw this kid and said, "We need him." So I think having the conviction in your scouts is awesome there too, and when it hits, it makes everyone look good. But yeah, to your point, like even if you believe that Kirill Kaprizov, if you're watching him in a league in some random Russian barn, is a can't miss player, a lot of things still have to go right to get him to that can't miss status. And for a while there, it didn't even look like he would ever be playing over here. So to your
And the
point,
other
who
and
knows?
the other thing is, like, if you're an area scout and you're
Mhm.
passionate about a guy, and I hear this from scouts all the time, like, I'm really passionate about so and so. Well, everybody else has to go. Like, they cross scout, obviously, and they have another area
Yep.
scout go and watch this kid in Waterloo or Holderness or wherever. They might go to a game and that kid plays like crap. And that area scout goes, I don't know what this guy's thinking, but I don't see it with this kid at all. And suddenly it's off the board. Or like you get to the draft table and you're really passionate about a guy, but everybody's passionate about guys, and your guy gets buried on the draft list and he never gets picked. But it's like, man, I wanted him, but the rest of my staff, the rest of my scouts, my GM, my AGMs, they didn't want him. And so that's why I think scouting it can be tough and it can be complicated in that sense where, like, as you said, you need so much to go right to pick a
Yep.
player, to get a guy like you to have that consensus even is big. And
Yep.
that's why, like, I liked this draft for them. They went
Yeah.
for high potential guys. Cooper Simpson, Vashik Blanar. Like, he's an example of, like, who the hell is
Yeah.
this? And
Never heard of
I
him.
again, taking things away from dev camp is never a good idea because it's
Mhm.
4 days and it's mostly drills. But, like, he's intriguing at the very least. He might be that guy that's like, oh my God, how did he fall to the 4th? Or he could be nobody and he could stink,
Right.
never pan out. But that's
Yeah.
exactly it. It's a
I
toss
know.
up.
And you talk about like also we don't have to hang up too much on past Bruins picks, but like, they have done it the other way too, where they take the consensus guy that falls to them. They did it with Fabian Lysell. That was
Mhm.
a guy that I remember that draft class when I covered it. I didn't even have him as an option because I thought he would be well out of the picture, probably in the top 10. And it just hasn't really worked out. And then everyone says, oh, well, Wyatt Johnson was right there. He went, 2 picks after. Buddy, if you were complaining about the Bruins not drafting top line quality players, and then you saw them draft Wyatt Johnson, who was a projected second round center, a two-way center when Fabian Lysell was there, you guys would have been losing your minds. You would have been screaming that they didn't take Fabian Lysell and Don Sweeney took some other random guy who was a two-way center that no one even heard of. So it comes both ways, right? And then, like you said, Letourneau might not be anything. But I think Letourneau kind of signified this direction shift in scouting for the Bruins, where it might have started with Lori kind of, in his draft range, where they went with the really like toolsy, high end, like offensive type caliber long shots. Because I think a common misconception with someone when you're drafting is like, oh, Letourneau, yeah, he didn't score last year in the college circuit, although he did score against the NTDP 18s, I think, when they were doing their scrimmage against
Did he?
BC or
I didn't know
exhibition.
that.
Yeah, I think it's not counted on the schedule, but I'm pretty sure he had a goal there. It was like a 6-1 game, if I remember. I'll figure that out and we can chalk
I
that from
vaguely
this if
do
we need
remember
to.
this.
Yeah, I think he did. I think he did,
That
but
18s team was not very strong this past year,
no, it
but
was not.
that's neither here
But
nor
my
there.
point is, they didn't take a John Beecher type ceiling with Letourneau. They took a grand slam. Either he's either going to strike out in very embarrassing fashion, or it's going to be an out of the park grand slam over the monster onto Lansdowne somewhere. It's
Yes.
I don't know. I think in terms of drafting, like you said, you got to have a lot that goes right, and I don't know. I think last year kind of signified a direction shift in that, and then this year kind of felt like the same.
High end guys. or high ceiling at the very least. Anthony, This has been a blast. This has been fun. We went over an hour. I never do over an hour. Court is really the only one that we end up going over an hour.
Well, that guy's a yapper.
Court's funny because he'll remember the Brian Windhorst meme where it's like, oh, this means this. Like Court always has like a galaxy brain thing that ends up like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Anthony, what can people look forward to from you? What should they be looking out for?
Just look out for more content coming out. I wish I could cover more of James Hagen's from his last season, but ESPN Plus dictates that they erase all of their collegiate schedule from the archive. So
amazing.
This upcoming season, you'll be seeing a lot of prospect film on, Hagen's, Moore, Cooper Simpson, and a lot of other Bruins prospects in the pipeline, Providence Bruins, and hopefully you'll be hearing more from me on the podcast waves as well.
That's right. You'll be back on. So that's Bruins Beat. Anthony, this has been a blast. That is Anthony, as most people know him as Bruins Network. And I'm Evan Marinofsky, you Bruins Beat listeners. Have a great rest of your week.